Appreciate you all being here. This session we're going to talk about hydraulic planning. I'm going to turn it over to these guys to introduce themselves, but just a reminder, PDH certificate or list is out on at the table. If you came in that door, please don't forget to come back through this one and put your name down. So, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen Morgan.
Good morning. Thanks, Wendy. Thank you all for being here in this session today. Hope you'll get a whole lot out of today. For those of y'all that don't know me, I'm Stephen Morgan, the State Hydraulics Engineer. And this is a session on hydraulics planning now with hydroplaning. So I think you'll get a lot of good information out of these topics that will be covered today. So the hydraulics unit staff, along with some really key consultants, have worked hard over the past few months and couple years developing tools and templates that we're presenting today. These tools and templates will make design more efficient, consistent, and proactive in areas such as stormwater compliance, avoidance minimization, and risk management. And if you want to hear more about risk management, I'll ask Drew Cox to stand up and talk a little bit about it. But I think y'all heard a lot about that yesterday in that opening session about how managing risk is so important on projects and quality as well. So I think you'll understand by the time we get through these presentations what we're talking about. So Brian Radakovic will present the updated hydraulic planning report. Matthew York will present the new outlet analysis tool. And then Daniel will present stormwater permit compliance planning. And then Matthew York will come back, finish the session with a presentation on the new hydroplaning tool. Hopefully you'll come away from these presentations with more knowledge and understanding of the importance of these items, especially as it relates to mitigating risk during project planning and design. And I want to give a plug to a session that's going to be in this very room right after lunch for managing risk. It's entitled Using Risk Management Tools on NCDOT Projects. So I hope that maybe you'll come back and attend that session if you want to understand a little bit more about managing risk on projects. We hope to have a few minutes at the end of this presentation for questions, but please do hold all your questions to the end. So now I'm going to turn it over to our team. Brian, come on up.
Hey guys, how's it going? Brian Radakovic with Hydraulics. I'm just going to do a really brief overview of the hydraulic plan report. If you've been with hydraulics, doing hydraulics work, you've seen it in the past. We want to get to the meat of the conversation with hydroplaning a little bit later on. So skip all that. So, what is the hydraulic planning report? It's a tool that we're using to help us identify project risks, various permitting requirements. It's been recently updated in the last year. Now it has some more VBAs or macros in it to help it actually produce a more consistent report throughout the whoever uses it. And like the PDN, it's also scalable. So it's good for, a small project and large projects right now. And when does it occur? Oh, I'm sorry. Thought I was. There we go. That makes more sense. Now you can see what it doesn't reflect it on the screen here. So yeah, like I was saying, it's just to address, various aspects. It's usable for all project types. And, when does it fall within the PDN? It's supposed to happen in section, I don't even know off the top of my head, but 2HY1. 2HY1, that's when it's supposed to happen. That's the suggested time, definitely after the alignment's been set. Like you've heard yesterday, the PDN is a suggestion, it's guidance. Doesn't have to happen exactly then, what works out best for you. So the project itself, the report itself is, like I said, it's an Excel sheet with built-in macros, and it also provides a general layout of any other supplemental information that we're looking for. This isn't everything. This is just typically what we need in there. So, every project's a little different, but this is typically what we'll see in there. And we'll kind of go through these throughout the presentation. So the first thing we have here is our basically the general project information. You're going to enter this in at the beginning just once. Once that's done, you're also going to be able to enter in information about project commitments, submittal tracker, or not submittal tracker, avoidance and mitigation, and also identify risks. So the idea is when you're doing this report, you kind of look at the whole project and you start inputting and putting those thoughts in now. And as you can see here, once it's all filled in, this will help us later on when we're actually completing the submittal tracker and avoidance and mitigation. Yeah, I can't say that word, so we'll just skip it. Something else that we have in here as part of the report is usually a site plan. So what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to open it up and you're going to see this dashboard. You're going to enter in, for larger projects, you may have multiple sites that you're investigating. For just a single bridge project, you're just going to have one. What you're going to do is you're going to come in here and you're going to enter in the information for each site. Once that's done, as you can see here, this is one that's completely populated. So all this information is entered in. It's then carried over into the actual report part itself. For each site has its own page. You're probably familiar with this. We've been using this type of layout for a while. We've kind of just like updated it and tweaked it a little bit to make it more accessible. And once that's done, we also add some other information like the layouts and such in here. In profiles, this is some supplemental information that's sometimes added. What else is in the report? If it's in a FEMA stream, we want to see the map for that. We also want to see pictures if they're available. Not always you're able to get out to the site, but there are lots of pictures available on the Wiggins database with bridge management, which is all accessible through the project pre-construction site. All right, so one of the important things we want to hit on is with the HPR that we now have the tools to help get ready to fill out the project commitments and the avoidance plans that we may have. So what we ask is that when you're filling out that report, you think about these items, because this is eventually what's going to end up on these reports that are now being provided by the pre-construction group. One thing I want to highlight is there's now a new, there's the risk assessment too, and the avoidance minimization. Okay, I want to highlight this new green sheet commitment. We've recently updated this. It used to involve, we would have green sheet commitments for FEMA compliance and as-built plans related to FEMA compliance. As part of DOT, we've tried to streamline the green line commitments, and we were looking at needing the FEMA compliance part of it. It really doesn't need to be on here. This is for construction personnel. We should have FEMA compliance before let, so that doesn't need to be part of the green sheet commitment. But what does need to be part of it is that we receive those as-built plans on FEMA regulated streams. And it's not just receiving the as-built plans, but it's making sure those as-built plans match what we decided was going to be built. This kind of goes through it a little bit. There is a report out on EAU's website that kind of talks about it, the special projects commitment guidance. If you have any questions about that, just reach out to me and we can help figure out. We've had a few people fill it out and use it. Some people have been using the old commitments, which we don't want. We want to use just this new commitment here. Now I'm going to hand it over to Matt here. He's going to talk about some outload analysis. Oh, sorry, forgot I had it on one last slide. So what is the hydraulic plan report? It's a summary of project commitments. It's a summary of what's out there, what we need to know to build the project. It's not a book. We don't want to see a thick 30-page document. We don't need to see the inspection reports as part of it. We just need the documents that we require to make the decisions at that time. So we just want to highlight that point, because sometimes they tend to get a little bit thicker and thicker and thicker as the years go along. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Matt. He's going to talk all about outlet analysis.
Good morning, everyone. I guess Andy and Steven didn't get the memo today with the shirts. So I'm going to go over the outlet analysis tool. We partnered with Kimley Horn to help develop this. A while back, we really saw a need to make this consistent. Over the years, as more and more work went to consultants and we started doing more and more review, we saw all the different ways people were producing it. And so, we took it upon ourselves to make it a consistent method. And so we've created this new tool to help with delivering outlet analysis, pre-post analysis, and meeting stormwater compliance. And so I'm just going to go over that real quick with you. The layout. So that's the cover sheet. One thing I want to highlight is you can add custom IDF data in there. Otherwise, it's going to default to the county seat, similar to how Geopack drainage does. And that's for rational method. Now, there are other methodologies that you can run, but it's going to be more of a fill out a form and not a calculation form. The rational really does all of the calculations kind of built in, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you do have another way of analyzing an outfall with USGS urban regression equations or routing, there is another way you can fill it out, and it'll be in a similar format. You'll just need to provide some additional documentation. So here's kind of the new layout. The first thing you'll do is you'll enter in your drainage area information. One thing that we're really focused on is how much drainage area is within NCDOT right away in the pre and the post. We really want to know how much impervious area we're adding to the overall sum. And so once you do that, you add in your time of concentration, and then you fill out your geometry information, your soil data, and then you can calculate your Qs, your velocities, and your depths. So another thing we've added is an area to provide a summary, so you can go over the outfall, what your analysis showed, what you're recommending for that outfall. You can also provide photos in the tool as well, such as here on a recent project. One thing I wanted to highlight is, we're really trying to address this 15A NCAC 04B 0109 rule. This is a stormwater rule that has been around since 1976. So it's something that we definitely want to start highlighting in our analyses and make sure that we're meeting it, because what it covers is the soil types and the velocities that cause erosion. And so here's just a blow up of the different velocities based upon your different soil types. And, if we're not designing it to account for that soil type, then we can be causing a problem downstream. So that's one thing we really wanted to incorporate in this tool. So with the help from Kimley Horn, they created this neat little case table now where you can see where you're in compliance with that rule and where you fall out of compliance. And so on the outlet analysis sheet, you'll see where the case type will auto-populate once you provide that soil type information. So what's next? Well, we're going to start incorporating the land use breakdown. Right now, it wasn't built into the original tool. We're hoping that this update comes out in the next month or so. It'll be version 1.1, but at the end of your summary from your outlet analysis table, it will now print out all of your input data from the drainage area input. And one thing that we definitely wanted to incorporate was a summary table. Something to have at the beginning of the report for all of your outlets so that you can see your pre-posts all in one sheet across the whole project. This is intended for better QC/QA, so you can identify problems quickly. We also wanted to include what the case types are to ensure that we're meeting that stormwater rule. So now I'm going to hand it over to Andy McDaniel.
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. My name is Andy McDaniel. I'm with the hydraulics unit and I manage the highway stormwater program. And I'm going to be, okay, I'm seeing the hydraulic planning report.
It shows up on the screen. It shows up on the screen. On the computer for some reason.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to turn like this a lot. So I'm going to talk to y'all this morning about the maximum extent practicable stormwater standard and some tools that you can use to be successful at that. So with a raise of hands, how many of y'all do drainage work for municipal clients or private sector clients? Yeah, a lot of you, right? So I'm sure that you're used to applying for stormwater permits, right, when you're doing this, and whether it be a municipal permit or a state stormwater permit, depending on where you are in the state. And what's interesting about that, though, that you need to know is if you're compliant with that permit, by definition, you've met the Clean Water Act standard of maximum extent practicable. So you probably never thought too much about what MEP, maximum extent practical, looks like. But DOT projects are different. We do not apply for stormwater permits. What's unique about us is that we have a blanket statewide NPDES stormwater permit that provides automatic permit coverage for your projects. Additionally, North Carolina general statutes and North Carolina administrative code have been crafted over time such that the DOT does not apply for municipal stormwater permits, nor do we apply for state stormwater permits. So everything's been kind of consolidated into the NPDES permit. And here's the front cover of the NPDES permit. And again, it applies statewide and provides automatic permit coverage for almost every DOT project you work on. Roadway project, non-roadway projects such as, say, a new rail terminal, a maintenance yard, a rest area, what have you. Rail projects are also covered under the permit. Ferry terminal projects, global transport projects are all covered in the permit. So you've really kind of probably never thought too much about applying for a permit related to a DOT project as it relates to stormwater. So that sounds great, doesn't it? Don't have to apply for permits. It speeds things up. It reduces uncertainty and project risk, right? Or does it? By design, with a little bit of context here, our permit requires the department to develop a post-construction stormwater program. And in that program, we don't have specific stormwater treatment standards per se. There's nothing in there that says thou shalt treat the runoff generated from the run-in storm. Rather, we need to meet the maximum extent practicable stormwater standards. So now you're going, what in the world does that mean? Have we really made things simple? What am I supposed to do here? And the fact that we've decentralized so much of our project management can only kind of adds maybe a little bit to that confusion as to what you're supposed to do. But the main thing I want to kind of point out to you here is really it's a balancing act, right? Finding the maximum extent stormwater treatment that you can do on your project that's practicable. So kind of always kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But here's the good news. Our updated 2002 hydro drainage guidelines includes a fairly straightforward 5-step process that if you follow this process, you will be achieving the MEP standard and you're good to go there. So I'm going to go through each of one of these steps. The first one is to set up project-specific stormwater treatment goals for each crossing. and document those in a preliminary stormwater management plan. And the goal can be one of three things. Using one of your BMP toolbox, BMPs such as that are listed in that manual, such as swales, bioretention, dry detention basin, and so forth. Remember at this stage at 2HY1, which is where you're filling this out, the first hydro stage, you're not going to have enough information to know whether or not the water table is right to put in an infiltration basin and so forth. So your goal is simply to implement a toolbox BMP. Or it could be using one of the minimum measures that I'll show you in a minute, such as maximizing vegetated conveyance. Or the third goal could be that a direct discharge is allowable, which we typically don't go to that goal unless we're talking about a really long bridge. So the good news also is, you may be thinking, all right, Andy, you said this is going to be straightforward and simple, but now you're trying to tell me you got to set goals. How in the world am I supposed to set a stormwater treatment goal? Well, the good news is that we've got an app for that. And it's called the North Carolina Seldom Catalog Tool. This was developed between USGS and DOT in partnership with the Federal Highway Administration. And what it does is that it allows you to input very simple drainage basin characteristics, upstream drainage basin characteristics that you literally copy and paste from stream stats that we're all familiar with. And then it asks you to enter in some basic information about the highway, such as the highway drainage area, the average slope, and the average flow path length, which you likely will have at this early stage. And it takes that information and compares that against a catalog of 75,000 model runs that we've already run for you. So you don't even have to know how to run the model, and it will spit out that goal for you, which you then add into your preliminary stormwater management plan. Literally takes, once you learn how to do the tool, it takes you 15 minutes. It couldn't be simpler. But to learn how to run the tool, we've published a series of 4 videos, very engaging videos produced by the USGS to teach you how to run this tool. So check those out. And then, of course, you report the results in a preliminary stormwater management plan. Well, what's that? Well, it's the same thing you're used to using. It's the same stormwater management plan Excel template that you're so familiar, and you just report out, okay, in the general project narrative, this is my project goal. This is what I'm going to try to achieve. Now, I mentioned minimum measures, and I just want to point this out. Minimum measures, we've got a whole suite of those explained in our post-construction stormwater program. Again, these are things like maximizing shoulder section to sheet flow runoff, maximizing the use of vegetative conveyances. So we have this information as a resource for you. But as an Easter egg, as a benefit for those of you who are attending this workshop, on the second page of these infographics, we have this little jewel right there. And that's language we've crafted for you to use if you wish to paste into your preliminary stormwater or your final stormwater management plan for each of these management measures. So you don't have to spend that time trying to think of that language for yourself. All right, that's step 1. Step 2 is very simple. Just attempt to design what you said your goal was. So if you said your goal was we're going to put in a BMP out of the toolbox, then going through the design process, you make the decision, okay, what's the best toolbox BMP for this project, and you put it in. All right, it's very straightforward. Step 3 is, okay, during that design process, identify and document any site constraints that were there. So this poor lady here is thinking, how in the world, our BMP decision support matrix says in a mountainous situation like this, drained into trout waters, a bioretention basin is good choice because it takes out sediment and cools the water. But where are we going to put a bioretention basin on this project? So you note that in your preliminary stormwater management plan, our initial thought was to put in a bioretention basin because of the trout waters, but we had these constraints. And you note that in your stormwater management plan. And then you design a feasible BMP. What will fit on that site? And you say, okay, we started here, but because of these constraints, we couldn't do that. So we put this in because this was feasible. And I do want to point out that what I'm talking about in this presentation is to comply with stormwater quality treatment. But as you just heard Matt say, there's also the 15A NCAC 04B109 rule for quality and, avoidance of erosion. So that also needs to be factored into your decision. So don't forget about that outlet analysis tool that Matt just mentioned. And finally, step 5 is to document the feasible stormwater controls that you did ultimately employ in your stormwater management plan. So this thing just comes along with your project, your stormwater management plan. You used to do it at the very end, didn't you? It was the very last thing you did. Okay, now we got to document what we did. Now it's more of, okay, this is what we're thinking about doing. These are the constraints that we ran into, and this is what we finally were able to do. And I'm going to explain why that's important in just a second. So I'm going to skip over that. Those are just the 5 steps, once again, that I just discussed. But in conclusion, the state's NPDES permit really does provide a tremendous amount of benefit to the department. It does help to speed project delivery and provide us a lot of the flexibility that I just described in terms of considering constraints. But there's no guarantee that this flexibility is going to remain into the future. Our permit is renewed every 5 years. In 3 more years, we're going to have a detailed audit of our program and by the regulatory agency, and if they are not happy with what they're seeing, then changes could come down the pike. If you remember Glenda Gibson's presentations yesterday, everybody's in a rush and they're trying to crank stuff out. And I'm getting feedback from the Division of Water Resources that they're not all that super thrilled with the quality of the stormwater management plans that are being submitted as part of 404, 401 applications. So it's what these 5 steps that I'm laying out for you now, what that will provide the regulatory reviewers is a window into your mindset. It demonstrates to them that you are thinking about what is required as the initial goal, and then they're pretty reasonable. They understand that there are unique site constraints related to transportation. And when you explain this in the stormwater management plan, you're going to get some good head nods. But if you just go right to the final thing that you did and you never explained your thought process, they don't understand that you really went through all that thought process, and they're thinking, well, you just did the cheapest thing you could possibly get away with doing. You did the minimum extent practicable, not the maximum extent practicable. So it's so important that you guys follow these 5 steps. These are legally enforceable permit conditions. This is not optional. So I want y'all to feel free to lean on the hydraulics unit. You can contact me. You can contact Brian Lipscomb of my staff, and we are more than happy to help you at any time going through this process. And with that, thank you very much. Matt?
Hello again. We're flying through this presentation. Wow. We've only been in 30 minutes and we're already on the last one. But I'm going to slow things down. I'm sorry. I used to have 45 slides on this because I was really going to go in depth on this, but we did shorten it a bit. But we'll just start into it. So what do we mean by hydroplaning? Well, we're not talking about hydroplaning from spread in a curb. We're talking about wide typical sections where water has to drain over 3, 4, 5 lanes. And we're seeing a lot more of that on our interstates these days. And so we've definitely seen issues with it where we've had safety projects where as soon as they put out dense graded asphalt for 4 or 5 lanes, they had crashes and they couldn't explain why. And their main fix was go back with open graded friction course, and that solved the problem. And so it really told us we probably have a texture problem. We probably have a pavement problem. And so that's something that we're trying to address with our new tool, the hydraulic analysis tool. We call it the HAT tool. And we're going to go over that today. But, whenever we're predicting hydroplaning, first things first, we're looking at how much rain is occurring before we see hydroplaning. Surprisingly, it's the lower intensities that are causing the hydroplaning. It can be as low as a 1 inch per hour event. We have a project in Division 13. We have a longitudinal slope of over 6%. It's so steep that the water path to travel across all the lanes and down the mountain is so long that you're seeing hydroplaning issues in the outside lanes in a 1 inch per hour event. So, but typically on most analyses, you're going to see hydroplaning occurring during the 2 inch per hour event, and that's going to be your majority of your controlling cases. So, the first thing we want to know is how thick is the water on the pavement surface? And we use these water modeling equations, and we take an average of those. And then we calculate how fast can we go before we start seeing hydroplaning. And so a few years back, probably in 2019, we looked at how we were addressing hydroplaning. We had a lot of different methods mentioned in the design build RFPs, and I really dove into those because things weren't adding up. I think firms were frustrated with FDOT's tool because it was very conservative. The other methods didn't really cover how to do an assessment for hydroplaning. So a lot of people were using the FDOT's hydroplaning tool. And so what we did was we looked at it and we spoke with FDOT. We spoke with the people that created the tool. Rick Renna and Katie Earp, who are now with Atkins, they got on board and helped us create this tool. But one of the first things we wanted to look at is it made sense. Why aren't we using an average method across these different methodologies? We're not using the most conservative. We're not using the least conservative. We're looking at an average across the board. I think FDOT had defaulted to a more conservative method going to Galloway's, but they weren't seeing hydroplaning at those speeds. They were calculating that you'd be hydroplaning, but they weren't getting crashes at those speeds. So we wanted to kind of rework the tool, make it less conservative and more accurate to what's actually happening out there. So what are the factors that influence hydroplaning? What can we control? These items we can control: the surface type, the rut depths, the permeability of pavement, the micro and macro textures, the cross slopes, longitudinal grades, and so forth. But there's a lot of things we can't control. We can't control environmental factors. We can't control the drivers very well. People see a sign, but do they always obey it? But there's something that we can look into, and we are investigating now and doing more research on, is the vehicle factors. But there's a big lack of data for those. And so we're in the process of getting more data to improve our tool. So this isn't just a one and done. This is a tool that's going to keep improving over the years. So in our 2022 hydraulic guidelines, we kind of lay out when you need to do a hydroplaning assessment. We cover basically that you need to do a preliminary assessment of your typical sections. This helps roadway to decide what typical section to do on a major limited access facilities in the planning stages so that they're not having to rework the typical later. I'm sure every roadway engineer would groan if we told them, hey, your design's good, but your typical needs to change completely. So I'm sure it's good to see it on the front end, and that's what we're trying to do by doing this. And then once we get the preliminary roadway plans, we're wanting to do a final assessment. We want to look at areas of concern. We want to look at areas where we have interchanges, where we have gore areas contributing to pavement width, where we have on-ramps, on-loops contributing to pavement width, as well as super elevation transitions, and the overall typical on your steepest part of your project. One thing that we did include in the tool is that we updated it based upon modern tires. One thing that the old tool did not account for was that the original equations were based on 24 PSI. Most cars today would have a warning light if your tires were at 24 PSI. So we changed that, we modified it to 29 PSI, and that actually has a big impact on your hydroplaning speed. It translates to about 1 mile per hour per PSI. And that was based upon research that we got from Ong Phua, who's done a lot of hydroplaning research over the past few decades. So we've also created more mitigation strategies. You know, when we first were tackling this, how do we handle hydroplaning? How do we mitigate for it? And so we do have a new tool out. It was just published Monday, and I'm excited to share it, and we'll go over that here in a little bit. But, you know, it's really going to be a helpful tool for the divisions to help figure out what they need to do to mitigate. So this is basically the requirements for when you need to do a hydroplaning assessment. One thing to note is that we will be doing an update to the guidelines, and we will be changing the design speed from 60 to 65. We've done so many assessments now that we can safely confirm that when you're at 60 miles per hour, you're not going to have an issue at an O2 for a design speed, unless you're over, I think it was 110 feet of a wide typical. So if you're seeing something over 110 feet, then maybe it will apply. But we're going to update that to 65 for the most part, and we may have that addendum in there mentioning the width. Okay? So just to go over our areas of concern, you know, these are our typical sections, contributing shoulders, your ramps and your gore areas where you have your 3 main lanes, you have your gore area and your ramp, everything's draining to the outside. You know, people are coming up to speed, so we're assuming they're getting at speed as well as everyone else. They're trying to get on the road. And also your super elevation transitions. So this is our new hydroplaning assessment tool. It's pretty easy to fill out. There is a table to help people fill out the form. It's in one of the bottom tabs. And so initially you'll just fill out your general information at the top. One thing to note is that we did add a duplicate scenario button because this is a time saver. It definitely helps if you're looking at the same typical section and changing the different pavement types or want to just modify your cross slopes or other things. It does save time, and we're really happy that it's included. One thing to note is that you can only do about 20 analyses in the current version before it'll force you to make another hydroplaning assessment tool. We're hoping to fix that in HAT 2.0, but just to be aware, there is limitations to how many tabs you can have in the Excel file. And so there's where you'd fill out your general information, your analysis description, alignment, stationing, as well as any analysis notes you have. And then there's a section where you can fill out your pavement type, what you're using, what you're designing to use. And then there's a way to lay out your lane geometry, and it does have a nice little graph that'll show you what your lane looks like. I am very happy that this is here because I've entered that lane geometry wrong so many times, and it definitely helps to see. So that's a great addition. Now, a lot of this we did get help from Florida DOT's latest tool. We basically took our engine, or we took their engine, and we modified it and made it a lot slicker. So, you know, we've got our basic scenario results. They pop up. It shows us our rainfall intensity, 2 inch per hour is your control. We're seeing the problem is in the fourth lane, your outside lane. We also have a summary down here where you can look at your predicted hydroplaning speeds. You can look at it for different intensities. And as you can see in this occurrence, the 2 inch per hour is controlling. We also incorporated a super elevation transition section. This is based off work from Charbonneau out of the, I think, University of Texas. He's still there working, but I don't know if he's still doing research on this, but we did call him and contact him about what he had done. Essentially what he did was he looked at super elevation transitions in a CFD model. And based upon his modeling, we were able to come up with factors to apply to our analyses. And so that's why whenever you're filling out this super elevation transition, it'll ask you for the number of lanes that are transitioning, and it'll pop up a factor based upon that. Note there is a warning here. You know, when we're looking at super elevation transitions, we're going to look at the O2 location. That's where we've kind of set it to do the analysis. And in this case, based upon dense paved, it failed. And so we were showing a hydroplaning of 52.6. So the great thing about that tool is that we can export it to a summary table. You can get all of your information here on your assessment table and basically show your comparison between your original design, your mitigation measures, and show where it went from bad to good. And so this is a great new incorporation of this table into that tool. It took a lot of work, and with Atkins' help, we were able to get it. And I'm really looking forward to the next iteration. I think you all will too. So I mentioned this earlier, the mitigation selection guide. This is something we've been working on since last year in partnership with our other teams at DOT, with construction, with materials and tests, with traffic safety, as well as the rest of our TAG hydroplaning group, our technical team that we've had since the last 3 years, I think. So the first things to be looking at is your different pavement overlays, your open graded friction course, ultra thin, your high surface friction treatments, and then the next is your surface treatments, like diamond grooving, diamond grinding, and shot blasting. Now, each one of those buttons up there, if you click on those buttons, it will take you to a summary of that information. It'll give you a full in-depth summary of what is open graded friction course, what are the prices, what are the maintenance concerns. And it really takes a deep dive into it. But this right here does a good job of just summarizing that information in a table format. But if you want more information, it's in the tool, in the guide. You know, whenever you're looking at a new design project, you really need to be looking at the geometry. That's the first way to mitigate for hydroplaning, is adjusting the geometry so that you can ensure that you're not having hydroplaning issues by moving the crown point, breaking slopes more, increasing your slopes, and eliminating additional pavement where you can. Other things that you can do are flattening the longitudinal grade and so forth, but we'll get into that more. But this is basically what's come out now and is available on our website under the Drainage Guidelines Studies page. And so, you know, when we're talking about pavement surface improvements, we're really looking at the texture of that pavement. You know, dense paved, it has hardly any texture. And so what we're talking about is we're trying to add MTD or MPD, the mean texture depth and mean profile depth. The reason we're trying to add that is because the less depth you have, the more water builds up on the surface. If you have texture, water can flow through that, and it can lower your water film thickness. And so that's why we're looking to improve that MTD value by different pavement options. So like I mentioned before, we have moving the crown point. We're eliminating that additional contributing area there. By moving that crown point, we're going from 4 lanes down to 3, all sloped in one direction. One thing that we're working with roadway now is a super elevation transition, where it's not all transitioning every lane at the same time. We're looking at lane by lane transitions. Now, this is something that Florida has done in the past, and they had to have profiles for each lane. As far as how we're going to show that on design plans and the constructability portion of it, we still have to work that out. But this is an option if people want to put it forward and try and come up with a way that it can be shown for contractors to build successfully. So if you have this idea and you want to tackle it on a project, then bring it to us. You know, we want to see it. We're definitely trying to make this work. Another thing to be looking at is intercepting pavement runoff, especially in the gore areas where you can put in a slotted or trench drain in that gore area to pick up water before it comes across to your ramps or from your ramps. So if everything's coming from the ramp down to the inside, you can pick it up to eliminate that contributing pavement. One thing people may find confusing is that flatter longitudinal grades are better for hydroplaning. You know, the higher the longitudinal slope is, the further the water has to travel. So the further it has to travel, the thicker it is. So it's actually better to have flatter longitudinal slopes. So one thing that we're going to be working with roadway on is developing standard typical sections in the next few updates. We're going to be looking at 3, 4, and 5 lane areas and the breaks from an 02 to an 03 and to an 035 in your 5th lane. So these are all things that we're trying to work through with them. If you've seen Florida's information, if you've seen their limited access facility documents, they already have standard typical sections, but just know that all their standard typical sections for limited access facilities are all because they use open graded friction course. So we're going to be looking at not just open graded friction course, we're going to be looking at the limits for dense paved asphalt as well as ultra thin. So some other things you can do is you can provide static and active warning signs. During construction, you can have temporary signage. If you have an existing problem and you want to warn drivers of the area, you can place those until that problem can be mitigated for. And this is just not a fix-all. but it's something to help improve safety. So what's next? Well, we've been using HAT 1.0 for a while now, and there are some drawbacks. It's not an all-in-one tool. Right now, you have to do your analysis, and then you have to do a summary, and it's usually in Word format or PDF format of your areas of concern. And so it's not very all cohesive. But HAT 2.0 will aim to fix that. It's going to be an all-in-one tool. We've been approved to go forward with that. Hopefully, we'll have that by this fall. It'll have a summary for every site. It'll show your area of concern. You can plug that into the report, so you can see that on there. You can highlight it, and also look at multiple mitigation measures for that one area on that analysis page. And then you'll also have your summary sheet. But now it'll print all as one big report. I don't think we're going to have the limitations that we do for the number of tabs now as we do now, because you can run multiple scenarios in one analysis. So that's something we're looking forward to getting out. And I've seen some beta versions of it, and it looks really clean, very neat. And so hopefully we'll have that out here soon. So some other things, we're looking at future research. Right now, our research is based upon Florida's research. We want North Carolina research. So in partnership with Traffic Safety, with Sean Troy's group, we're looking at driver speed reductions throughout the state. We're looking at, intensities during real-time events, how much people are actually slowing down during a 4-inch-per-hour event, 2-inch-per-hour event, 3-inch-per-hour event, and really trying to incorporate that into our tool. Now, that study's still ongoing. We're trying to work with the people that helped develop Bridgewatch. Was it U.S. Engineering Solutions? And we're going to try and get that data for intensities that they can map out with our INRIX data that we're now getting and the archived HERE data. And so we're really excited to see what the driver speed reductions are. And that's going to be based upon the different pavement types. We're going to be looking at dense paved. For dense paved, you're going to have a lot more spray than you would for open graded friction course. So, right now we're showing 12-mile-per-hour decrease for a 2-inch-per-hour event, but maybe it's more due to spray, depending on the area you're at. Is it rural? Is it urban? Is it high traffic? And so we're going to really dive into that and really get more information on that, so we can improve the tool and make it more accurate. Also, there's a study now with NC State. I can't remember the name of the study going on, but it is in partnership with Traffic Safety and Materials and Tests. They're out there getting MPD data for all different types of pavement, and we're going to get more accurate MPD data for all of our different surface treatments. Right now we have input into our tool, but there's some shocking things that we're learning from this research. Right now our tool looks at a 0.024 inches of MPD for dense paved asphalt, but the data is showing that on initial install, you're at 0.012, half of what you're actually running in the tool. Within a month, you're at 0.014. It roughly takes about 2 years to get to that stage. So really we're working through with them, what's a good MPD value to be looking at for these analyses? Because we want to know what risk can the department take on. So these are all things to be thinking of. MPD is not a stagnant number, it changes. It can increase over time. It can also decrease due to wear and polishing. So I just want everyone to kind of think about that and chew on it, and also, think about that when you're doing your designs. So just to summarize, I want to reach out to all of our partners and all of NCDOT. You know, if you have an idea to improve a method or a tool, please let us know. A lot of these tools that were created here were with the help from our partners like Kimley Horn and Atkins. And, you know, if you see a need to improve something to make it more consistent for our project delivery, let us know. We're interested. We definitely want to improve project delivery. And so these tools have come out of that. And so I was going to hand it over to Stephen, but thank you, everyone. So I guess we'll take questions now.
If there's no questions, that means you guys have no problems with anything that we do.
So you said we typically use open quarters right now? Is in the analysis if we don't have that data yet? I think pavement becomes the design of pavement later
Right now, we use a default data for dense paved asphalt, and that's what you're looking at when you first do your analysis. Most people are going to be designing for dense paved just because it's a cheaper option. If you do see hydroplaning issues, start looking at the roadway geometry. That's the first thing to do. If you don't want to have to go to ultra-thin bonded wearing course or open graded or some other type of treatment, or even concrete. Concrete's also an option in there. But if you don't want to go to that, you can start at looking at the geometry of the roadway. Yes?
I got a question. So the older tool, you said you guys were quite happy with the, you know, you weren't seeing hydroplaning when the tool was not telling you you're hydroplaning when you thought you should be or vice versa. Is the research with this tool, are you happier with it? Or I'm just curious what type of research you guys are doing to see if, you know, it's actually what you're seeing in the real world is matching up.
So that is coming. We are working with traffic safety to see what the crashes are, but you got to know that the data they're pulling from is from state troopers filling out forms, and how accurate is the data that the person that crashed, how accurate are they reporting? So we did talk to GM and a few other car manufacturers when we went to TRB this year. One thing that we're looking to do is, as more and more smart data is coming from vehicle data, we can get speeds and crash speeds. It's coming. I think that could be incorporated in the NRIX data. GM's in a partnership with NRIX, and so it's not here yet, but that's coming. And so we're hoping to incorporate that in the future to see if we're seeing crashes at the same, but we're not stopping here. Once we get HAT 2.0 out, we're working with Argonne Labs right now with the National Highway Institute. I think that's right. But we're trying to work with them now. They're doing CFD modeling to see what water film thicknesses are. The main thing is we need more funding for research. We need to redo the calculations. Galloway's work is from the late 1970s and early 80s. Pave Drain came out in the 1990s. And so all these different methodologies are outdated. We just haven't had the research to update them. So what we've done is we've taken everything that's out there today and tried to make the tool as accurate as we think is possible. And we're really confident in what we've built, but you know, it's not perfect. It's still got a lot of missing data points. And so we're looking into all the different aspects. One thing that we would love to have is tire data, but getting the tire data from the tire companies is very confidential. We think there's also some savings there with the tire tread. That's one thing that we don't really take into account very well, is how well tires can shed water based upon the tread pattern. And I think if that data were to come out and people's tires were showing worse hydroplaning, I think the tire companies would be very upset. So we're trying to work through that, but what we have is the best that's out there. I would say right now we're leading in the nation. So, any other questions? Yeah.
So most of the mitigation measures are related to roadway geometry. So we've kind of had some very mild success with turning the tool over to our roadway folks while they're designing, to kind of identify some of those things that they're fixed at real time. Is there any consideration of trying to make that part of roadway design versus us analyzing after it's already been set if there's preliminary grades?
That's a good question. So there is a tool right now in ORD that kind of does what Florida's tool does, and it will calculate a water film thickness. The goal is to get to that point so that when roadway designers are doing their design, they can run the tool in ORD and it actually model the predicted water film thickness. But we're not there yet. We're hoping to get there. But right now, we're too short on data and research and real world testing to back it up. And so we're hoping to get there. But, that's a great idea. If roadway designers want to be looking at it beforehand, then that's a great idea. I would have to let roadway incorporate that into their guidelines. I can't talk for roadway, but I think that's a good idea.
I did mention that was mild success.
Mild success. So, yeah.
I got a question for Andy on the preliminary S&P. What's come of the kind of first interactions and trying to maybe implement more water quality measures? Thinking about maybe like division of other projects or local industry projects when you're maybe in the scoping phase or when you get to the CFI or wherever you're at in the process. It's like, oh, here's my estimate. We aren't planning on buying right away or moving utilities or there's maintenance. There's all kinds of concerns that are going to come up when we're trying to implement some new stuff that maybe some folks aren't used to seeing as far as water quality. So how has there been any pushback or any kind of negotiation? How does that typically?
I know exactly what you're saying. And maintenance is a big deal. And it's difficult on the divisions because they've got a lot of competing issues. At the same time, I think it is important for us to realize that in many respects, our post-construction stormwater program is the envy of the nation. It really is. I work some nationally, and nobody else in the country has what we have. So I think it's important as a department that we kind of understand that you can't abuse that. So we've had situations before where we've been asked as the hydraulics unit to kind of be an intermediary. And we're happy to serve that role to help explain, say, to the division or other why this is beneficial to the department and what it is. I will say, though, that we are working on new BMP technologies, more nature-based technologies that are expressly intended to be lower cost and lower maintenance, because we get the maintenance thing overall. So, there's not a great answer to that question, but I will say that if you would like to reach out to us, we can try to help with that. But if, we've got some other tools I didn't discuss a lot, or our BMP decision to support matrix. So what that tool is, and it's on our website, is when we tell you initially, choose something from the BMP toolbox. Well, swale is in the BMP toolbox, right? So people tend to default to swales. But you also need to remember that there can be other factors. If it's a Class C water, nothing special going on, then yeah, swale may be fine. But if you got an endangered species, or if you got Shellfish waters, a lot of folks, want to harvest those waters. The swells maybe not be your best choice. And that toolbox matrix, B&P decision support matrix, helps you, provides the justification for your decision. So there's not, Ryan, a really great answer to your question. It's just something we're going to kind of have to work through as a department, but I really appreciate you bringing that up because we have to have that frank discussion. If we don't, then, we may be in a position where, we have much more prescriptive requirements and you're not given a choice. This is what you shall do. And so many DOTs across the nation are like that. Thank you for the question. Any other questions for Brian, Matt, or myself, or Steve?
It doesn't have to be related to this presentation, so if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to ask us, especially while Steve's here.
Pound away.
I got one, Steve.
Oh.
So, your Alice analysis tool looks great. When you're increasing just too much, when you're just increasing that, you can't get over it. When is DOT biting the bullet and putting hardcore detention? Or is there a breaking point of 10%?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because, we, like Andy said, the 04B, 109 04B rule has been in place since 1976, and we hear the 10%, and it's founded in that rule. If you can't do anything else and you're not increasing more than 10%, you're still okay. But yeah, you go beyond that. It does sort of come back to a maintenance issue, and I think like we talked about that with Andy quite a bit too, is go through the PCSP and sort of see if there is sort of the support matrix there. If there's could be a water quality violation just based on turbidity or increased velocity. Maintenance is always a concern. I'd much rather see buying that easement, that right of way, armoring an outlet to a good stable outfall. Those are my preferences. I tell folks all the time, the BMP that I prefer is one where someone doesn't have to get off the tractor to maintain it. That's the perfect one. But certainly if you get into an interchange situation, some places where some type of detention facility may make sense, there's certainly an option, but hopefully more on the lower end of the option scale, but always think about maintenance first. And I would definitely discuss those with the division. One thing, certainly if you're in a municipality and you could turn that maintenance over to a municipality, just be aware of it. Trying to see if anybody from roadside's here, but we've done that in the past and we wound up having to go out and bush hog what the municipalities didn't maintain. So it's a challenge. Andy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Just to clarify, there's nothing in that rule that speaks of greater than 10% peak flow or 10% volume. It's only about velocity. So how that morphed into 10% peak flow is one of the great mysteries in the hydraulics world. But what I would encourage you to do is think about the risk, okay? What is the risk of us eroding the channel downstream? We've got a whole group in hydro operations that a big chunk of their work is going out and dealing with drainage complaints because, they're receiving DOT water and they're not happy about their property eroding away or potentially getting flooded. And when tort claims are filed and that thing goes to court, you know how often we're successful? Almost never. We settle them all. So as designers, it's really incumbent upon you all to do the right thing for the divisions and not put a lot of maintenance headaches on them dealing with eroded channels, to think about what is the risk of this happening and what are the repercussions of that risk. So keep, and think about, okay, how much further down the line? So we're just wrapping up some research with NC State to try to develop a planning level model as to what the risk of accelerated erosion will be from a given DOT discharge. It's been a tricky bit of research. We had some smart folks with Dr. Bill Hunt's group work on it. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but still, I think keep in mind what's the ultimate ramifications on the division and the division maintenance staff. What are they going to have to deal with if we have a discharge that does cause accelerated erosion? Because it's a lot cheaper on the divisions if we handle it up front properly during the TIP than they have to deal with it, under their maintenance budgets. You want to add anything to that, Brandon, at all? Okay.
Yeah, one thing for sure is, don't, if we're going to go with some type of facility, don't put it down the slope behind the sound wall where we can't get to it. Seen that a few times. At least put a lockable door. Now, it's not, you can't get a piece of equipment through a little door. But yeah, it is all about sort of that long-term maintenance concern. And the other thing too is, as you're filling out, I know Andy, you spoke about it probably, but ensuring that we have stable outlets. Riprap's not a bad thing in the stormwater world. It is a stability measure. So just think about those things. One thing I think the overall theme here is just really about risk management, and just sort of understanding if something could happen, it probably will at some point. In those maintenance budgets, we keep saying it over, but they are so small, and we own the project forever. So are there any other questions out there? Yes.
I don't have a question, but I do want to share some information with everyone, if that's all right.
Sure.
I'm with NCDOT, Office of Civil Rights. Just wanted to let you know we have a table here on the networking session. I am not sure if anyone or everyone here is familiar with the small professional services firm certification. Do we have anyone in the room that is certified? So we are planning hopefully in the near future to have set aside projects for engineering, architects, consultants. So if you haven't yet become familiarized with the certifications that NCDOT offers through the Office of Civil Rights, is that right? And just get some information, and hopefully that can benefit you and your firm. We also have pre-qualification here in the room, and we can be on the spot. But again, we are the Office of Civil Rights. We have a table just outside in the class. If nothing else, just again, keep that in mind. And also the DBE is the Managed Business Enterprise. That's a federal certification, and the SBSM is the state certification.
Okay, thank you. One thing I want to mention too is on the on that tool, some of the soils that you see on there, colloidal, non-colloidal. I'm sure everybody understands exactly what all that means, but we do have a crosswalk table on the on our website, and you should be able to find that pretty easily. I know we're right here at time. I don't want to be the last group out going to lunch over here. I think it is time for lunch. I've been asked to bless the food, so if you would, if you'd like to, please bow with me as we get ready for that meal. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity to gather in this place. Thank you for the information shared, for the presenters, and thank you for helping us apply this information to the projects we work on. Now, as we prepare for lunch, bless the food to our nourishment, and may we find your blessings in the service we do. In thy name we pray, amen.